AI happens pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, it might just pass you by.
Hello, and welcome to The Reasoning Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today I have reason to wonder and think about, as more and more of software is being developed through AI, whether it's through AI agents or AI coding assistants, what are the number of things that we're going to have to change around the entire software development process, from development to planning to testing to validation to deployments to monitoring? And we're going to dig into all that with Jeff from AllStacks right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by ShareGate. You're out of time. Copilot needs to be deployed ASAP, but your tenant really isn't ready for it. Years of data, permissions, and users lurk in its shadows, ready to be exposed by AI. ShareGate Protect sees it all, so you can find the exposure risks, fix them fast, and deploy AI with confidence. Microsoft 365 Governance, they've got this. Learn more at sharegate.com/protect. Today's show is sponsored by Nasuni. There's a growing gap in AI right now between what's possible in theory and what successfully works at scale inside an enterprise. The difference comes down to unstructured file data. Many AI initiatives struggle because the file data they depend on is scattered, unstructured, and disconnected from where and how work actually happens. Nasuni changes that. It brings your unstructured file data into a single, secure foundation so AI, both generative and agentic, can access it with the context, governance, and performance it needs in production. Bring AI to where your unstructured data lives. See what it takes to activate your data for AI and request a demo at nasuni.com/AI. And we're back. And today I'm excited to have with me Jeff Keyes, Field CTO at AllStacks. And we're gonna dive into what's going on around AI-driven development, both the good and the bad, and how we try and get a little more under control. So Jeff, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Brian. I love this topic, by the way.
Yeah, good. Excellent. So before we dive into it too much, give us a little bit about your background, kind of, what you've been working on, and maybe more importantly, what you're focused on these days at AllStacks.
You bet. The short story is I've very ADD focused, it appears. Started my career off as an engineer, developer, even though I was studying electrical engineering. Went through the worlds of product, went consulting and a fair number of things. Landed in marketing because I was convinced I didn't know what the business reason was, which resulted in learning a lot. And from that role now bounce somewhere between product and sort of evangelism kinds of things. But
Sure.
Ultimately, the goal is to help companies improve their software delivery processes, which right now is completely being, how do I say it? It's shifting sand. Like, What does it look like and everything? It's just cool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, your background is not much unlike both myself and my normal co-host Aaron, in which we've sort of lived in the trenches. We've done a lot of hands-on stuff. At some point, things got complicated and somebody said, hey, you guys are pretty good at explaining stuff. Can you help us in these other roles? And then, you find that both the technology has complexities that people need help understanding, explaining, and then there's the intersection of the technology and business, which is its own sort of Venn diagram. So yeah, it's, like you said, it feels like it hops around, but it is somewhat of a natural progression sometimes if, you think about the things from technology to business and everywhere in between.
Man, it really is. I laugh at myself as I think I was 24 in my first startup, and we decided we're going to go build our client server accounting system. And I was like, yeah, that's going to rock. And then we got into this whole thing of like, okay, we were divvying out the work. And Jeff, you're going to own the AP module. And I was like, awesome. What's AP?
Right.
And then, it's like, you can see all the eye rolls and things like, well, what do you want to do that for? What's this thing about GL and T accounts? And ever since then, I realized that having an engineering degree, being a software developer, wasn't going to get me to where I really wanted to go. I wish more people spoke in the language of the business. The point of Agile even is to produce more value faster. Well, what's value? Why? Yet we still communicate in a language that has been nerdy, story points and releases,
right.
And anyway, it's just funny. To your point, understanding and explaining and labeling things in a business sense is the key.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is a complex world in multiple phases that we deal with. So I think it's always interesting when folks end up having an appreciation for kind of what you talked about, just the language of somebody else who's trying to sort through something, whether it's accounting or software development or business strategy or something. I want to dive into your day-to-day job, your day-to-day activities, because you get a chance to talk to a lot of engineering leaders, which feels like every company, we've moved from the days of every company does what they do to every company is going to become a software company. And people had different opinions upon that, but it's kind of come to fruition. And now we're dealing with every company is trying to figure out, how do I apply this new AI technology to the software that's differentiating our business or allowing us to engage with customers differently? What are you seeing as this new AI capability is, like you said, sort of overtaking a lot of engineering organizations? It's changing really, really fast. So you're never quite sure what the next 3 months are going to look like. Yeah. What are you, what's surprising you the most? Where are you seeing gaps? Where are you seeing successes? Kind of give me the lay of the land, at a high level for what, for the people you're engaging with these days.
That's a great question. At the first answer is like people are trying to, gasping for air, trying to keep up. There's already a day job and you got to get all that stuff done.
Yep.
At the same time, engineering leaders that I talk to are facing staff reductions because it's so popular right now. Get rid of anybody that has been an agile coach or a product owner or scrum role. It's like, I'm sorry, technical program managers, engineering operations. There's been such pressure to turn everyone into hands-on delivery. And yet we still need to make sure that the factory is moving and get all that done at the same time as the process is changing dramatically, not just the process, but the teams and the roles, how things work at the same time as the expectation of why aren't you moving faster? Hey, we just spent real money on all these tools. Maybe it's up to, is it 10% of a salary in each person? What's it look like? So what I'm seeing as I talk to people is overload. And in fact, as the coding phase, which wasn't ever really the truest long pole in the fence in the project plan, but now as that compresses, it's leadership is facing this information overload. There's more decisions and bigger decisions that are happening faster.
Yeah.
And just trying to keep up with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it really is a strange time that we live in because in reality, people have been living with like literally generative AI for let's call it 3 years, 3.5 years, whatever.
Sure.
But the code, and the coding tools kind of followed rapidly. But in all reality, if we told anybody, hey, there's this new technology that's out there, it's 2.5 years old, it's changing rapidly, there's not really best practices for it. In the past, we would have said, okay, well, let's figure it out. Let's sort of build some best practices. Let's see what other companies have done. Let's begin to adjust some things. And it really has been amazing how fast you've seen, you're never quite sure if it's like, did you take that action, whether it was a reduction in workforce or did you take that action because you'd already experienced something and it made logical sense? Or did you do it because, 3 other companies in your city or your industry did it? But it is amazing to me. We went from software and acquiring people that had software skills from the whole life cycle was so important to now, people are treating them a little bit fungibly without any sort of best practices really in place, which is really, really odd.
Yeah, it really is. And the definition of the role is changing. I just read a report yesterday looking at the role of product management. In fact, how, has the number of open positions from product management increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, well, both increased and decreased.
Yeah.
The total number, what stayed the same is the total number of open positions. What's decreased are traditional product management roles. What's increased are product management roles over AI features that know how to use that. Similar in development, the need for junior developers that don't know how to do anything. Sorry, that job is done. If you're not enabled with AI tooling and know how to, not just prompt and code completion, but understand a bit of agentic development, you're out of date.
Right.
Nobody needs that.
What are you seeing beyond the sort of organizational things and just keeping up with stuff and so forth? Like, what are you seeing in terms of the actual code that's being created, the developer output? What are you seeing in terms of are we getting better code? Are things moving faster, or are there some byproducts that maybe aren't terribly desirable?
Well, I like how Dora, the DevOps research assessment, which is now owned by Google, did a report last year. And I like how they quantify the impact of AI as being an amplifier. It's amplifying productivity of individual developers. It's not answering the question of, are we getting more stuff out the door? And we have this at my company, right? Every company I talk to is the same. Great as the ability to produce more code faster is amplified. What happens to the rest of the idea to getting things into a customer's hands pipeline? Well, the answer is like the bottleneck just shifted. Mm-hmm. And it shifted to points of planning, decision-making, and ability to verify what's going through the pipe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm seeing that both in theory as well as in execution. I read an article yesterday, a guy named John Willis, who is sort of famous in the DevOps community, always was a proponent of Deming and the things that, Deming talked about in terms of process. And he sort of said, if Deming were to sort of come back, he would look at this and he would be very confused because we're highlighting the acceleration of, like you said, an individual developer or some project, but we're not addressing yet the full flow of getting that into production, life cycling it, making improvements and stuff. So yeah, it kind of reinforces the idea that there have been blips of things that show the possibility of this, and at the same time, it hasn't even been around long enough for us to think through the completeness of it.
Yeah. And then once it's at a stage where we've thought through a little bit of the completeness, it's changed again.
Yeah.
The big shift of 2026, I think, is going to be not the shift of using AI, but it's going to be the shift to agentic development, meaning it truly is this world where I as a developer and I as a dev manager have my team stop writing code. Just have the agent do it. But it means you got to be really smart, because if you've seen AI slop for different things, get ready. That's what's coming to your code base unless you know what you're doing and how to iterate through the prompts and do it in a way where you're not going to end up with slop. It also is going to put more pressure on the PR process. And I think one report I read is that, and I hear this all the time, right? People are complaining about what do I do with a 5,000 line PR? Mm-hmm. How it'll take me so much time to review it that I just can't even keep up. So dev teams are becoming reviewers versus writers. They're just like, how do I manage this? Product teams trying to generate more. So I don't know. There's some really interesting things that are happening in this journey. What is the role of product anymore? Do they need to produce tickets and requirements? Can they just produce, I don't know, a proof of concept? That's a whole topic we should talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and we've talked about this a little bit, like the days of sort of, will we write very long specs for things ahead of time as opposed to just building a minimum viable product and bringing that literally to the first meeting and being like, this is what's possible. And then getting people's feedback, kind of that, you can see the value of like, immediate feedback. You could sort of see something, and at the same time, it has the downside of, okay, you got people excited about it, but you really haven't thought through the whole architecture of this thing as you would have in the past that would have taken the time. And it's interesting to see sort of where we've put accelerators and where we've sort of downplayed things that we used to seemed really important. And it's a weird phenomenon. Like you quote unquote vibe code something. And in the past we would have been like, oh, cool. That's just it's your weekend project. You don't take it seriously. And now people are like, yeah, just put that in production.
Well, and there's some good logic to it too.
Sure.
I mean, think of it from a perspective of the product leader, right? My role as a product leader previously was you go do a bunch of customer research, come up with a set of requirements, validate some kind of user experience just in mock-up form, have people respond to that, iterate through those kinds of thinkings, translate that in a set of actual work tickets to get done, then dev goes builds it. Well, if the cost of building compresses, there's value in just building this stuff and seeing what people think. There's also danger in doing that because, what if you build yourself into a corner platform wise, or you start adopting data and it turns out it's not really vision oriented? It is a crazy time. I met with one customer that is doing exactly that. They're in the healthcare space, highly regulated. And so they effectively took a platform team and enabled them to move forward with the idea that their handshake is the proof of concept, not a requirement stock. They would then use that to generate the requirements and the dev-oriented specs that would then get handed off to groups of agents to go build and iterate on the feedback as they go, with the intent that they would increase the cycles between ideation and customer feedback. They found it works so well for them that they're trying to now use that for the entirety of the organization, including, which is another interesting case, they need to re-platform one of their products. The product was built on a platform that they don't really want to support. They want to move it from NetWorld to Java platform. Great. How are they going to do it? Reverse engineer the requirements and the specs from the product and the code, and then move it forward using the same model, getting things in a way that where, the requirements and the specs become more of what they're actually building than the code itself. It's a fascinating model because it changes everything. It is saying the contract that we used to have as product people, where the contract was, this set of tickets, it's kind of different now.
Right.
My output if I put on my product guy hat is, well, maybe I need to just be building stuff. It's far more consumable to look, here's a piece of software than here's a set of specs, read it and tell me how it works.
Right.
With the downside that you just mentioned, right? Did I think through everything?
Yeah. What I'm curious is, as we're sort of dealing with this, it's sort of like if you take a balloon and you start squeezing parts of it, you can make one part smaller, and then obviously it pushes the pressure somewhere else that becomes bigger. You can constantly sort of manipulate the idea of, if I think about sort of the full process of building software, testing software, deploying software, life cycling software, in theory, you're like, well, I'd like to make all of it go faster. Because, more that gets out there, the more people can interact with it, the more you can iterate, kind of all that goodness. What do you, as you're talking to team leads, architects, VPs and above, how are you kind of structuring that conversation? Because we are right now in a situation in which, yes, in theory, so many of these things could go faster. You could apply AI capabilities at any point in time. It could be to the coding process. It could be to, CI and merging. It could be other stuff. How do you do that when in theory, or probably in practice, that the speed, the acceleration isn't going to happen all at the same time? And part of that's going to be as much cultural change as it is technology change. How do you start to frame that conversation, or what questions are you asking to help people understand the gives and takes and stuff like that?
Well, it's interesting. The reframing conversation still has, with most people I talk to, the reframing conversation still has the same contract boundaries in place. If you talk to product people, their contract is a series of tickets and PRD. If you talk to dev, their contract is they consume that and they consume a user experience and produce said code. And it's funny because it's this reframing of, well, what are you actually responsible for? If you, back to the point of, if you fix one point that was a bottleneck, you now need, and didn't fix anything else, it could be that you're at a bottleneck just slow you down, which is kind of what we see. I think code review time has jumped to, it's almost to 25% to a third of the time of most dev teams now. As the more AI adoption, get ready, code review, PR, reviews now consumes just as much time. Made worse by the fact that some teams had a bad habit of just rubber stamping these in the first place. You imagine your face melt as you see a really significant PR come through that's going to take you half a day. They just rubber stamp it. And so management came in and said, well, we're just going to get rubber stamping. Let's have 2 people review it. Great. Now we've slowed down even further, focusing on this next bottleneck. Then comes AI to go fix that problem. On the requirement side, the next bottleneck is this massive void for filling in requirements for what development actually builds. And dev teams are saying, well, you know what? I got this cool Claude tool here. I can jump into Claude Code and Spec Kit and a few other things, and I can go write me up some good requirements.
Yep.
It's good enough, right? They look great. Is it the right thing? In fact, this is where it just gets funny. The roles blur, and they should a little bit.
Yeah.
In fact, they should a lot while we try to figure this out. The point for engineering leaders and product leaders is you need to do some experimentation here without being constrained to the traditional contracts that you had before of the handoff points. The handoff points have always been the problem.
Right.
How can you speak in a common language of what does success look like and what are the things that are coming out? Software is a great way, and adoption and consumption and things like that of, sure, there's bug rates and so forth, but getting that out to customer base as the common goal.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that with big teams? You can't.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's interesting because it's, we could take AI out of this conversation and you look back at the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like every shift in sort of, application architecture that's changed, whether it's been microservices or serverless or anything along those lines, the bottleneck is ultimately, at least in terms of adoption, has always been, you used to have, very well-defined roles or very well-defined groups or very well-defined tasks. And the answer in many cases is, like, you're going to have to blur some lines. You're going to have to sort of, ask somebody to do a role and a half because, then it, the handoff now is in the right place as opposed to where it used to be. And yeah, it'll be, I think we're still almost in too early a days to where people are like, well, let me redefine what that looks like. It's a little bit like you said, you need to be willing to do some level of experimentation, probably with a subset of the people in your group, and figure out both where the technology works and then where where your culture and process works and breaks, and then adapt accordingly.
Spot on. And in fact, make sure they do that experimentation end to end.
Yeah.
From idea all the way through to being in customers' hands and measuring value, whatever that is.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's hard to make it generic. You can give them some blueprints or some guidelines, but yeah, you have to go. Now you need to apply this to what you do, and it 80% of it might work, and the other 20% might not. What are some of the sort of red flags that when you hear people saying, "Hey, we're doing this," or we're running into this, like what are some of the immediate red flags that you kind of go, okay, I know that seems rational, but like you just stop for a second. Let me explain some things to you. Or what are some of the things that, again, might have been unexpected that you've seen as people are adopting and using more AI tools to build software?
Well, probably the biggest red flag I hear is AI doesn't work for us.
Sure.
Because I don't even care what answer you put in. Security, cost profile. I even heard, because we're worried about environmental, we're worried
Sure.
about the impact it has to the environment.
Yep.
And all I want to say is, if you haven't figured out that this is coming for your job, if you're in that mindset, okay, see you in a year. The second one that I hear as a red flag really is not, like I said, not thinking about the contract boundaries. You have to explore every aspect. If you don't think this redefines your team, you're missing the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree with those. Yeah, those I've seen firsthand, and it is a little bit of an awkward conversation to sort of, especially for the person who says, "Oh, it's not for me," or you don't want to just purely make it of like, this is a do or don't sort of survival thing, but you almost have to show them like this is the difference between sort of you and then you with the right set of tools, knowing what they're capable of, because they're really, and I've said this a few different times, even just the things that I've worked on, like they really just are in a very different sort of stratosphere.
It is
mostly in a good way.
I know one more that is like massive red flag, because I'm at AllStacks, because AllStacks in our history have been a metrics platform,
mm-hmm.
showing people standardized your sprint burn downs to your DORA, value stream flow, space metrics. It's funny when someone says, I'm going to use me some AI to make sure I get a higher deployment frequency, or I get, pick your favorite metric here. With probably my least favorite and most fun one to make fun of is lines of code produced.
Yep.
Please, so much of what has been developer productivity, it all gets thrown out right now.
Yeah.
Just look at the outcomes and stop looking at, you got to put this together end to end.
Yeah. And you live in that world. You've lived in it for a period of time. You've also, been around the tools that were measuring it and people doing it. Yeah. It always has been such a strange conversation of, on one hand, you could measure it by a simple metric like lines of code, which has no way of having a value representation against it. It's just a value, like it's value against it. And then on the other hand, every developer you talk to is like, man, I only write code 10% of the time. Even if you make me 50% more productive, that's only, that's only a few extra hours a week that I'm actually writing code. And so you live between those two sort of abstracts and everywhere in between. And it has always been, kind of like you said, if the thing you weren't ultimately measuring was like, what's the value of the output? Yeah, you did get yourself into some very interesting rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, usually it's an executive that has read some article about how, gosh, if you only deploy to production 20 times a day, like you're going to be really successful.
Right.
Well, I can deploy comments to production all day long.
Right.
No problem.
Right. Yeah. Our industry does have a tendency to go chase the white rabbit that they heard about or, read about in an article without ever being like, well, does that matter to my industry? Is that gonna drive more customers to our business or make them more loyal? Or I want to ask you one last question. We've talked about a number of things to look out for. Obviously, be good to engage with you guys if people want to dive into it more. If you put your crystal ball hat on a little bit, and I know this sounds ridiculous to say, hey, where do you what would you expect things to look like, 12, 18 months from now? Or if you were advising somebody about like, hey, this is kind of where to shoot for. And I know that's insane to ask because every 3 months this space feels like it gets flipped on its head. But what are sort of the big fundamentals that you're sort of advising somebody towards if they say, hey, where do you think we should, we're going to start today or we're going to move from where we are, but where should I shoot for a year from now just to give me some sort of light, kind of light at the end of the tunnel? What do you think that looks like?
You bet.
Generally, what do you think it looks like?
Well, first of all, I think teams are smaller, dramatically smaller, in fact, owning their own direction, because if they're not autonomous, they're, figure out what your platform teams, your common stuff, figure out what your actual product are that go to market. The idea of a 2-pizza team is dead in my mind. We're going to go to, is it single pizza team? Is it less than that? Is it half a pizza? It'll include a builder, someone who owns what it is, the innovation side. It'll include a code who's got to own the actual technology and throughput. It'll own some aspect of the design and quality and all the rest of that stuff gets built in. That has to be highly autonomous, highly enabled with the tooling so that their contracts work together well. I think AI is going to impact every single aspect of this, from the ideation and summarizing how quickly can we get ideas that we're hearing as mixed with usage data that translate into features that have to get built so that the actual coding part, it kind of compresses and goes to zero. All we're doing is deciding like what's the best bet to make and deliver it out. I think over this next year, that's become so autonomous that we just are filling in the gaps, running, managing around it. I think developers are going to spend more time managing and communicating and reviewing and judgment and architecture than anything else. Yeah. And this becomes a new job. And telling the agents where they screwed up on the building. I think product people are right now is like the time for product people, man. The number of sources that you have to take in and consume of different data sets, all of a sudden everything came to your fingertips. And it's awesome. I think people that are over this as an executive layer, now are going to have even more visibility than they ever had before, because now you can use the tooling with AI to pull together analytics that you never thought possible. You could correlate how much spend did you have in a particular area and look at it in terms of the number of agents and AI coding with the quality that you did, to look at consumption versus how many times was that feature used on a sales call and how much is it driving future pipeline, and do some real business cost analysis that's way more real time. Funny side note, right? We always talk about value. Like the wonder, the ideal wonder that no one's ever achieved is like, we invested X dollars and we got this dollars out. No one's ever been able to do that, because the dollars out is always a lagging number that's so far in the future that you can't ever get there.
Right.
Well, as you start to correlate the investment that you have and how it's being treated in sentiment in phone calls, in sales calls, like, it's game changing. Listening to current customer adoption, those feedback loops are dramatically compressing. I think where the whole world is going is that we're using AI to help us in our decision making, because the process is compressing and we can no longer manage what's going on without the help of AI to interpret the signals and correlate them together. So it's a really, really fun time to be in this industry, to watch this world deliver more software better. Side note too, I don't think there's a office work kind of job in the planet that also isn't producing their own code for their job.
Yeah, I agree. I've sort of taken to sort of adopting the mantra that sort of all jobs are software. You know, I mean, if you work in some sort of knowledge work job, you know, when you're in front of a computer every day, I think all work is software at some point in time, and you don't necessarily have to write code, but you are going to start to think in terms of, like, I do things that are processes. How do I make those better at an individual level or a team or a group level? So yeah, I would completely agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, like, it was just this week that I ran an agent to analyze my calendar for what kind of meetings versus thinking time I had over the last month, and how do I revise it so I have more thinking time with this, you know, what meetings do I get rid of? Yeah. That's awesome. I wrote my own, you know, no code, but just ran that.
Yeah, no, and it's going to be little things like that, you know, collectively give you back 10 minutes of time, 15 minutes of time, an hour here, and those things are going to add up. So yeah, no, I'm going to wrap it up there. I think you made a pretty interesting statement. Like we've never had a time where it was probably more interesting to be around software, and at the same time, the uncertainty around what the future of, you know, software and how it'll work and how we do it probably is at an all-time high as well. If you enjoy change, and you enjoy sort of thinking through the possibilities of that, this is a very, very interesting time to be around the software space. So listen, Jeff, thank you so much for everything. Folks, we'll put some stuff, you know, that we talked about in the show notes if you want to follow up on some things. And obviously, if you want to follow up with Jeff and his team, we'll put notes in there about how to reach out to them as well. But Jeff, thank you so much for the time today. Thanks for, you know, kind of giving us some background and some insights into what you're seeing. Obviously, you've got a tremendous experience around this space, both pre-AI and now around with AI. So thank you again for the time. And folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. And we will talk to you next week.
Check us out online at reasoning.show for all things reasoning. And leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to the show.